يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي وبياني عربية قلبي.
Yeah.
As a result of that, she should be allowed to enter competitions with other women.
Or even, it's very topical because of course they're talking now about people that claiming that they're transgender, men that want to be women and claim that they have the right to go into women's change rooms and use women's facilities.
Yeah.
And that's becoming a very topical.
There was something about transgender men in prison in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago, and there was this photograph of a bloke in a wig, and he somehow managed to. I mean, part of the problem is the authorities are so fearful of stepping on people's toes with the political correctness now. So it worries me that there's men who clearly are pulling a fast one. How can I get into a women's prison? I know, I'll put a wig on and claim that it's my right.
I'll go amongst 1,000.
I think maybe I'm being.
So these are some of the problems with.
Yeah. There's a kind of level of common sense to apply, surely.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, it's not that ideological.
Now, I saw recently on YouTube, Piers Morgan have a discussion, about this whole gender neutral thing.
Yeah.
That you're not even allowed to discuss, like you can't even use the pronouns that are like.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
One of the headmistresses of the I don't know if it's involved, one of the top high schools here, one of the top private schools. She was saying, I don't address pupils anymore as she because it might offend those amongst them that feel that they're potentially boys. So you have to use pupils, you have to use gender neutral pronouns all the time. I think we've gone too far.
No, absolutely.
We're embracing diversity to the extent that we're denying reality.
I like it. Do you know this what you just said is quite powerful because I was having a discussion with one atheist before, just like last week, and we were having a discussion, and he said something really quite powerful. He's a critic of Islam. Like I'm Muslim, he's a critic of Islam himself. But he said one thing about Islam that I will say. Yeah, he said that the thing about Islam that I like is that it celebrates masculinity and femininity. Like for us as Muslims, we don't shy away from calling a man and a woman a woman. And there's a clear differentiation between this and that. Now because of, equality is great to a certain extent, where it doesn't kind of, once again, eliminate the nuance, I would say. Eliminate the actual physiological, the psychological, the emotional, and the biological nuance. And I feel like that's the way the West is moving. It's eliminating the nuance so much that now we have these discussions of we can't even call someone she or he or something like that.
Yeah.
That's true.
To a certain extent, I go along with that, but I'd also add, traditional Christianity is in there as well.
Accepted, and Judaism.
I move quite a lot in Judaism, and perhaps a lot of traditional religions, because that's where they come from. They come from, enforcing.
Why does Islam require men to wear beards? What does it do?
Does it?
It does. So there's two or three.
Plenty of Muslims around here who don't. Keep on Facebook.
There is basically there's two or three ahadith or prophetic sayings. One of them says al-fitratu ashar. It says that of the things that are natural among men, among human beings are 10. And one of them says that having a beard is a natural thing. It's just a natural thing. It's a status. It should be a natural movement. It's an inclination that human beings have. Another thing is that it's mentioned in a hadith. Another one is of Ibn Umar. It says, "Awfu al-liha wa qussu sharib wa khalifu al-yahud wa nasara." It says that grow your beard and trim your mustache and differentiate.
Why trim your mustache? If you want to grow your beard, why trim your mustache? Why cut your hair?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's natural. You just let your hair grow.
Yeah, it's not about natural.
Why they choose only the beard?
The beard. So that's a good point. So for example, the pubic hair we have to cut. We're not allowed to cut. We're not allowed to have a.
Natural.
Yeah, we have to cut it.
Seems a bit kinky.
No. Every man and woman, you have 40 days. You've got to cut your nails and you have to trim your pubic hairs everywhere. You have to clean it up like that. But your beard, you've got to leave it for the man. As for the woman, obviously she can shave whatever she wants to shave.
Yeah.
You have to trim your fingernails.
Yeah, every 40 days, yeah.
That's reasonable hygiene, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not really reasonable from a European perspective because it wasn't really known. This stuff wasn't, this commonsensical stuff.
Why did God give you growing fingernails then? Why does He keep growing your fingernails if you just want to trim them?
To give us the agency to try and realize dirt, differentiate it from cleanliness.
Why does He give men nipples?
Do you know why? So we can ask
I don't know why.
do you know what's really, let me say something, right? Dirt. Wait a minute. What did I, okay. Dirt. How can we? First and foremost, how do I identify dirt? Do you identify dirt?
I think
If something is dirty, do you know it's dirty?
if it's smeared in mud or something. That's,
Fine. Do you identify it as dirty?
Yes.
How do you know that it's dirty?
It's a supposition based upon appearance.
Okay, appearance. What about the appearance makes you think it's dirty?
Are you saying because it's dark?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm asking you.
I don't know. And I think it's quite
Do
self-evident.
you know? Yeah, I agree with that.
Something which is not in its normal
Right.
form.
Thank you. Now, the Islamic thesis is that human beings, through first-person subjective experience, will differentiate between cleanliness and dirt. From a scientific perspective, from a logical perspective, a mathematical perspective, there is no reason for human beings to differentiate between cleanliness and dirt, unless, from a Darwinian perspective, it appeals to a survival of the fittest logic.
No, it's
Most,
hygiene.
pardon?
It's hygiene.
No, I'm not talking about.
Microbes exist better in dirt than
No, fair enough. But we didn't know about germ theory until 1895 when Louis Pasteur came around and told us about washing our hands. Human beings are not conditioned to know about germ theory, but they are conditioned, as you and I agree, to identify dirt. Now, the Islamic position is that we as human beings identify cleanliness from dirt. We know about clean. We know what the word clean is. We know the idea. We have the first person subjective experience of what is cleanliness. We can differentiate that. That's why the hadith says, Al-fitratu ashar, Al-fitratu khams. There are 10 things which are innate, intuitive, and predisposed. And then it mentions, for example, washing your mouth out. Washing your mouth out. That's a natural thing human beings do. Al-istinthar, basically washing your nose to some extent, making sure that you're clean. Cutting your fingernails, cutting the underarm hair, and obviously the navel hair. It's natural for you to do that because you realize what is dirty, right? And then you kind of get rid of the dirt because you feel at rest with that. Now, just as you have a physical dirt, there's also, we would argue, a spiritual dirt. And the spiritual... No, honestly, the spiritual dirt is the corrosive, corruptive force of societal decay, which is coming onto one's spiritual inner dimensions. We say that the only way to clean yourself from that dirt is to embrace, once again, the predisposition, the cleanliness of God. And how do we get that? Through revelation. And that's why God, in a beautiful verse in chapter 24 of the Quran, it says that when you interact with the revelation of God, the Quran calls it nur ala nur, that is light upon light, where you're literally being illuminated from the spiritual insides. Your inner dimensions are being illuminated. So the idea is this: Islam actually claims to be a spiritual guide, whereby if you consume it, you'll be illuminated from the inside. Just like you identify through first person subjective experience physical dirt, and you differentiate it from cleanliness, you'll be also able to also differentiate between spiritual dirt and differentiating it from the cleanliness of
spiritual dirt could possibly be.
It doesn't matter. No, you see, this is...
You will know. You will come to know.
This is why...
I will not be judged because there is no judge.
Do you know, it's right.
If there
You're
was
the
a
judge.
He wouldn't have waited 4.5 billion years.
You're the judge.
To make himself known to us.
You are the judge. You are the judge in a sense.
Why do you think that the workers existed for 4,500 million years and God waited until 1,400 years ago to send down a few prophets?
Well, the thing
You're
is,
being too picky. You're being too picky.
God doesn't really wait.
You see, what we've heard here is one of the reasons why, although I count myself as a soft atheist, let's say, as you well know,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I do respect religions. Not every bit, not every word, not every bit of every religion at all. But you know what you say. I mean, what I see is kind of quite an eloquent way of analogizing. You know, the outside world of conceptualizing something called dirt, which then we can build a story about. So for me, it's all mythic, but it's about.
Well, I mean,
it's about essentially it's about giving people, ordinary people who don't necessarily want to think about these things too much, a direction. Which actually is healthy.
Okay.
physically and spiritually. So that's fine. And I do think that that there's no such.
I like your honesty there.
There's no such, if you like, doctrine as atheism. I think that's something that theists often miss.
We're
not all a group or something. We don't sort of. It's just it's only defined by its negative. It's a lack of belief in.
Let me tell you
But
something.
I think probably what we do lose, and that's why I now start calling myself a Christian atheist, because I identify with Christianity.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of those things, because of the community, the ritual, the ethics.
So why do you call yourself Muslim atheist?
because I'm English.
Oh, okay, so
Why
it's
would
more.
I mean,
okay, I get you.
You know, if I'd grown up in Egypt or something like that, and I was the same kind of,
I get what you're trying to say. It's a
agnostic or
so you're kind of conservative in
assuming
that.
you hadn't been slaughtered. No, there's a lot of people in Muslim countries. And I think this is in Islam, isn't it? It says you're in a thought, so you're in a thoughts.
Yeah.
But you're expected to kind of
comply to
That's
the.
how things were in this country 300 or 400 years
And they
ago.
still are like that now.
And absolutely. There's always some framework that you're expected to conform to. Absolutely. Now it's political correctness. And we can actually stand here probably agreeing with quite a lot of the critiquing of political correctness from different angles. But I mean, I more and more, I mean, there was something that Pope, what was his name, Ratzinger or something, said to an interviewer. He said, if you don't believe in God, just act as if you believe. So in other words, if you have doubts and so on, there's still the whole business of being part of the community, of facing that direction, if you like. The more I sort of engage with some of the more, we were talking about this earlier, the guys that you criticise, like Dawkins and Krauss and so on, I think that they don't really offer much. I mean, the scientists.
They don't.
And they seem to think that based on their account of evolution and whatever and so on, that they've done it. Well, not for me. I've thought about this quite a lot.
You're right.
Well, actually, no. You haven't commissioned it.
You haven't done anything.
Your account. It's one aspect. Basically, they're describing an aspect which I'll go with. That there is an evolutionary story about how we got here and how culture develops.
Exactly.
Sort of thing. But then we kind of take off on our own. So the culture, and this is where they go wrong. They seem to apply the methods that they use when describing how species evolve. If you look at Dawkins and so on, to what we do in our culture, it's an entirely different dimension. So as soon as we have language and culture and so on, things take a life of their own. So ethics, art, aesthetics, and so on. Don't try and reduce them to some sort of so neuroscience. That's one of the big things. You see neuroeconomics, neuro-art, neuro-literature, and you see essays written by somebody who interprets Dickens in terms of, Charles Dickens'
neurology. I mean, and that's materialism.
Nonsense, because it is absolutely, and you're right to criticise that. And I've become to realise that I think a lot of atheists.
I think you're coming in our direction.
No, I'm not.
It's coming.
I'm not. Well, I'm.
You will come.
I don't
Do you know why he's going to come to our direction? Because let me tell you why, right?
When you say yours, you mean Islam?
Yes.
Anyway, I mean, I'll leave you
and
with
you
that
as well.
sort of happy thought.
Let me tell you why, right? Do you know what's missing with the materialistic account? And I was having a discussion with someone else about this today. Materialistic accounts or naturalistic accounts, phenomenalistic accounts, physicalistic accounts, they do not take into consideration first-person subjective experiences. You cannot explain first-person subjective experiences. Now the thing is with naturalism and science, generally speaking, it's third-person.
That's right.
So you put something under a microscope, you understand it. Now when I was talking about cleanliness, this is actually a very important discussion. Now you might think it's trivial because what is cleanliness? It's very subjective. It's actually incredibly subjective, right? Anger, joy, happiness, all of those are first-person subjective experiences. Yet we cannot deny that we experience those things. They in fact come before the third person. The first person, by definition, comes before the third person. Islam or religion generally, spiritual frameworks, attempt to basically appeal to first-person logic before they appeal to third-person logic. So when I say, for example, that we have a spiritual framework which attempts to illuminate the inner dimensions, it's more than just mythology. And I'll tell you why. Because I can say, by the same token, right, and listen, I just think about this for a second, I can say that your happiness, your sadness, your joy, all of that, because it's first person subjective, it's myth. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I can't put it under a
Oh, wait
microscope.
minute. Just hold you for a moment there. I think there's.
Do you see what I'm
there's
saying?
always- yeah, I do. I think there's something which is a fairly common problem with using the word myth. I might
Right.
be wrong here
Yeah.
because I realised this when I started. I'm quite a Wagner enthusiast, and I'm actually going through the Wagner's operas again, and of course I don't know if you're familiar, but they're essentially based on the Norse legends. So the gods like Wotan and Thor and Frigga and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And there's very little chance that these gods actually exist.
Look,
but wait a
I'm
minute,
not
but wait a
I'm not disagreeing with you on that
no,
one.
but wait a minute. The point is that these operas and these stories are full of mythic content. So this is it's not the word myth here does not point to. I mean, you have the expression urban myth, which means something that's a story that goes around, but it's not really true.
Yeah.
But you see, that myths like the gods and so on in Wagner's operas are myth in the sense that they are stories that appeal to that first-person experience. So things like duty, honour,
I see that, but
sacrifice, all that sort.
There's one difference.
So, and I think that's what religion is. So when I use the word myth
Right.
about religion,
Right,
I'm not
but-
dismissing it as being.
Yeah, I'm not talking about
I'm not
religion now.
using all right, yeah.
So here, because the example I gave wasn't about God, generally speaking.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though I could make that, I could bring that to the fore, because frankly there is no evidence that someone is born believing that Jesus is God. There is zero evidence of that. There is zero evidence that someone is born believing that Thor is God. But there is evidence from a variety of different sources that children are born believing in a higher entity of some sorts. Not naming it or understanding it, but believing in a higher entity of some sorts.
Been refuted.
I don't accept that.
Well, we won't go down there.
Yeah, no,
You
there is a
watch-
discussion
watch
on it.
the YouTube video. There's
Yeah,
a
I know.
discussion.
There's a discussion.
So I'd say
Because of
you-
social sciences, I understand that there's going to be back and forth.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is this: generally speaking, what we cannot deny are first-person subjective experiences. Now,
Yeah.
the interesting thing is, putting religion to the side now, one thing that seems to be, I find this really interesting, right? One thing that seems to be universal.
You get what I'm saying? Yeah. Look, we got one already.
One thing that seems to be universal is emotion.
No one else is talking.
Yeah.
Let them talk. Let them talk.
Is it kicking off?
Is it kicking off?
I can't really see much because of the light. Yeah.
So one thing that seems to be, sorry, what was I saying? Universal is first person. Now that manifests itself in a language which is cross-cultural. It's a cross-cultural language, yet no one has codified it. For example, I feel happy, I smile, right? No one has. There is no manual. There is no grammar to this language.
Yeah.
Yet we can recognize, we can feel happiness and recognize happiness. Where does that come from?
Those
How do you
basic
explain
ones,
that?
yeah,
Those are. Do you know what these are?
Go on then. Yeah.
Smiling is a myth from a scientific perspective. Happiness is a myth. Why? Because scientism postulates, and materialism postulates that which cannot be substantiated materialistically, naturalistically, from a third person, microscopic, scientific inquiry type perspective, doesn't actually hold any epistemological value, right? So here, if I come...
Ontological value.
Pardon?
You mean ontological value?
Ontological value you could say as well, right? Because that's
Well, that's
theory of
different
being.
Yeah, that's right.
A theory
I
of...
thought you were saying it doesn't
No, I
really
mean
exist.
like epistemological value. Actual value as a knowledge.
Something we can know.
As a thing, right? So now, if we take that perspective, which is materialism, naturalism, etc., the act of smiling, first of all, feeling happy, and then manifesting that happiness through smiling, cannot be proven naturalistically. It cannot. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. It literally is a naturalistic myth. Now, I'm saying to you that the axiom, which is smiling, the axiom, which is feeling happy, because it is kind of axiomatic, it's something which is intuitive, first person, has to have a metaphysical, must have a metaphysical explanation, which basically explains this. And my postulation is that this metaphysical explanation is an intelligence, a high intelligence, a powerful intelligence, a wise intelligence, a mover, a creator, a transcendence. which we, in religious terminology, call God, generally speaking, right?
We moved on from athletics, haven't we?
Do you see how the argument goes?
Oh yeah, no, I kind of, I'm with you until the last jump.
So we have to
Because
somehow explain why babies smile.
Yeah.
Smiling is something that's natural to babies.
Yeah, how exactly?
But actually,
But why?
yeah.
Why and how?
I don't know that we have to invoke a creator to try to explain it.
Okay, to explain it naturalistically, phenomenistically.
What you've well pointed out, and I do actually agree with you, is
Yeah.
deficiencies in the
Materialistic framework.
worldview
Yes,
of
yes.
explaining these sort of
Yeah,
things.
yes.
What I was saying earlier, that essentially they are phenomena that philosophically speaking, that there's big problems with this naturalistic, this ontological naturalistic.
Yeah.
I would say I'm more of a methodological naturalist. So in other words, the way we investigate the
I think you're fair enough to, you're critiquing it though.
Yeah, so I think there's that distinction to be pointed out, which is the presupposition, which is a lot of what a lot of the naturalists are doing. The presupposition that the ontology is naturalistic. I wouldn't go that far. I'd say that, well, in our investigation of the world, we have to make some presuppositions.
Yeah, it's true.
And I simply say, for the time being, until there's massive evidence the other way, we assume that the ultimate mechanisms of the world are explicable in naturalistic sense. But what I will then say is that if you like, what's lacking, it seems to me, is the development of a language within science. Now, this may not be possible, not within science as it's currently constituted, of a language that does enable us to think about these sort of issues of inner states, of how they relate to.
But I don't think that science can ever do that.
Actually, it's probably right. It's probably not the field of science at all. It's more philosophy, religion, art, poetry. I think that there's quite a lot of scientists, if you like, who are far too optimistic about
what science can do.
Their essentially ontological naturalism.
Yes, I agree with
and
that.
they run into the ground because they can't give accounts of these sort of things. Now, maybe there'll be some way of modifying the scientific world.
But I think you're very honest to say this. So that if from an explanation perspective, religion offers a more comprehensive account of metaphysical realities or the intuitive nature of man.
No, it's just the God of the gaps. You're just saying, if we don't understand something based on science, we just invoke a creator.
I'm not saying it is the God of the gaps, because you can say it's the science of the gaps. That's exactly what I believe. It's actually science, because God of the gaps is something that basically, if we don't understand something, we say God did it, right? But I can say that the same thing would apply to science. So if you don't understand something, you just say it's neurological, which is what he was saying. So for example, we don't understand consciousness, the mind, metaphysics, first person subjective experience. So let's just say science, it's all neurological, right? So the boomerang can come back.
But science is not finished. Science is still probing these questions.
But science can never understand metaphysics, because it's based upon naturalistic presuppositions.
We're parsing words here, but okay. I'll accept that science doesn't.
So
science and metaphysics are two.
So my point is, when you look at first-person subjective experience, the best mechanism to explain.
يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي وبياني عربية قلبي